So welcome again, everybody. Thank you for taking time this morning. I just want to do a quick couple of things. For those of you, I think Nancy, you were unable to join us last time because you were flying, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, the objective of the group, and I know Skip was also not in attendance at the last one. So, the objective of this group is really to be able to look forward at the larger projects that are on the horizon and be able to help with ideation around both opportunities to slot in terms of prioritization and afford the things that we need to do for the town. So there are a number of current projects that are identified in the document that was sent as part of the 2024 capital planning. And we actually had a couple of more that were listed because things like Hale and Sheehan were not on the 2024 capital request list. And I want to have Stephanie just do an overview of our current town debt and then go into an update with respect to a couple of the projects that are on that list. And then we'll get into a discussion of working groups to help be able to explore a couple of opportunities. And then I'd like to have a discussion about availability for future meetings, because I know originally we talked about this being a quarterly group, and there may be some opportunities to increase that frequency if that can work for the group. So with that, Stephanie, would you mind taking us through, a review of the current town debt and sort of timeline?
Sure. Is it okay if I quickly share my screen just to pop something up?
Please do.
Excuse me, Rob, while Stephanie's doing that, I just want to point out, we do have the Sheehan School on the list. The list that was sent to everyone, we have it with a TBD, to be determined. We also have it listed on our FY24 through FY28 summary of future major capital budget requests, estimated
Okay.
future costs.
I may be misremembering the 23 capital, right?
But they both have no dollar amount.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Can you see that?
We can.
All right. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. I'm just going to do a brief overview of debt and sort of the difference between exempt and non-exempt, and then pull up a spreadsheet on our current total outstanding long-term debt and just sort of give a brief overview, and then any questions anyone has, just pop on. Okay, so town meeting authorizes borrowing of any funds for a specific project. State law governs what can be borrowed and the terms. Currently, the town holds a credit rating of AAA from Standard & Poor's, which is a great credit rating for a small community. And it's also a great benefit to the town because it allows us to borrow debt at the lowest possible rate. Once that debt service is issued, all principal and interest payments are included in each year's budget in a centralized budget called debt service. And that current repayment schedule, which I'll show you after this presentation, is updated annually. And then only each year's scheduled payment is included in that fiscal year's debt service budget. And I know Chris had previously emailed out to the group the town's policies, financial policies. So this just highlights debt management. We try to use prudent use of debt financing as part of those fiscal planning policies. That includes responsible policies for borrowing, including appropriate purpose, timing of projects, and terms of repayment. That just sort of, this slide just sort of goes into, as I was referring to, the AAA rating, which was last issued in March of 2022 when the town underwent the long-term borrowing for the school project. So this graph just highlights the amount of total outstanding debt at the end of each fiscal year. So just for a reference, right here at the for fiscal year 23, that amount totals $86,817,500. And you can see the large increase is due to the Hanlon Deerfield School project. This slide just shows the most recent debt sales that we went out for. Obviously, the bond sale in July of 2022, which was the $60 million long-term debt bond with a net interest rate of 3.7. As I said, that was for the school project. We also recently issued a short-term note sale in April of this year, which was for $1.225 million, which was a one-year short-term note that had a net interest rate of 3.08%. And that was for the 3 design projects that were approved at town meeting of May 2022. We will, and I'll get into this a little bit too, but we will be rolling that and issuing it for a long-term debt along with the projects that were just approved at town meeting last month. So there are, I guess, 2 types when we talk about debt. There's debt budget within Proposition 2.5 and then outside of Proposition 2.5. This slide shows debt payments made each year within Prop 2.5. So this is for non-exempt debt that needs to be within the town's ability to pay as part of the yearly debt service. So as you can see for FY24, that number is 3.3 million. And just some examples of things issued within this are DPW road work. And we also efforts are made to take on new debt as older debt drops off. So this just gives an example that in 2012, there was a $4.6 million bond issued for road work that was for 10 years, which was completed in 2022. And then that space provided for a $4.65 million road bond that was approved at the 2020 town meeting. And that was issued within Prop 2.5.
Stephanie, if I could just ask you to hold for 1 second. Hey, Tish.
Yeah, sure.
Would you be able to call Tish over to Skip Wells? He's just texting me. He's having a little bit of difficulty getting in. Go ahead, Steph.
Yeah, sure. So for debt issued outside of Prop 2.5, the budget includes any principal and interest payments for bonds, net of any state reimbursement. So when it's important to note that those are issued, example of that is a school project. So it needs to be voted as an override at town meeting, and then taxes are increased for the term of that bond. And when the bond ends, the exempt taxes end. So for FY24, that amount is 4.3 million. So for example, in the FY24 budget, the debt service is a total of about 7.6 million. So it includes both exempt and non-exempt debt. It just, the funding sources for those are a little bit different. They're both funded through taxes, but one is due to increased taxes for the term of the bond. And I should point out here that the high school, the last payment on the high school bond was made in FY23, which, as I was saying, is part of our fiscal policies to issue debt whenever old debt is rolling off. So just an example of that. So the high school payment end, and then the Hanlon Deerfield bond begins. So it doesn't make up for the entire new increase in the debt, but it just shows that we try to be strategic with how we issue that. And I just wanted to go over quickly, as part of the financial policies, it states that the annual non-exempt payments, debt payments, so including inside Prop 2.5, should not exceed 8% of the net general fund revenue. So in green right here, that shows the financial policies, what it should not exceed. Right now for this fiscal year, that equals about 8.8 million. And the actual right now is 3%, which is about 3.3 million. So we are well within our financial policies currently. And if I could, I'm just going to bring up quickly. Hoping this will give a little bit more detail on. So this is the long-term outstanding debt currently within the general fund. And as you can see, the 2 different examples I stated. Outside Prop 2.5, which is exempt debt, and within Prop 2.5, which is non-exempt debt. And it just shows the different projects. And as you can see, The high school is listed up here with the maturity date that just ended. So we had the last payment in FY23, and the new Hanlon Deerfield School project, which the first payment is in FY24. So taxpayers will see that first payment coming on in July, and as part of the taxes. And then within Prop 2.5 is just a list of all the projects. And as I said, a lot of it is the DPW road work. We have the cemetery expansion that previously happened, the police station construction, the library, some more road work. And as you can see, that number that I stated earlier, the 86 million, plus the total sewer debt, comes to the $86,817,500. And then this section right here just talks about the general fund debt that's authorized, so a town meeting which was authorized but has not been issued long-term. As you can see, the 3 projects I referenced, the design projects that were approved at town meeting in 2022 are still on here because we've issued debt for them, but it's a short-term ban, and we'll be rolling those into a longer-term sale with the projects that were just recently approved. So that 26 million is debt that is authorized but not yet issued long-term. And a big portion of that is the rest of the funding for the construction of the Hanlon School. And then lastly, I'm just going to pull up, just because I referenced this is a look at, and I know this is usually a spreadsheet, so I apologize if it's not too easy to see. This is just a list of the total principal and interest payments for each of those projects that you just saw. So it's all the out years and then the total of all payments that are due. And then, as I said, when old debt rolls off, which is included in these boxes here, then new debt is taken on because it frees up capacity within our debt service budget. And so for FY24, that number I referenced is about 7.7 million as the total general fund long-term debt that is owed. So that's sort of all I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen unless, Rob, you want me to go back to anything in particular.
No, I think that's very helpful. Just sort of, giving everybody familiarity and background on where we are and what our policies are with respect to debt. I know, Chris, there are a couple of projects that you want to be able to provide an update on in terms of status. So if you have that, please feel free to share.
Oh, sure. Thank you. So the town has conducted or is in the process of conducting a feasibility study on Fire Station 1 headquarters, which is on High Street. And we're hoping to have something for the select board early in fiscal year 24 to share with them. And then we will certainly share it with this committee as well. The other thing that we've done is we've received a grant for an ADA assessment. So we looked at town facilities, some playing fields, and we will have that report in early fiscal year 24 as well. Just to give everyone an FYI, I did ask from the consultant standpoint, I was looking for warts and all when it comes to this assessment. And I believe for at least 2 of our buildings, one being town hall, you will see a lot of blemishes. Let me just put it that way. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but we will certainly be able to take this assessment and use it as an action item list for future capital requests as we move forward.
And Chris, just so I'm clear, and for the group, when that ADA assessment is done and we are sort of presented with the warts and all, is there a time frame to cure on something like that? Because obviously, as we talk about these various projects, there are a number of things that impact the timing of each, right? Some are, requirements, statutory requirements, and others are availability of external funds, a la the MSBA for the school. So I'm curious as to, are there things that we anticipate needing to cure in a time frame when that comes back?
So I don't know if they're going to identify a specific time frame, but there will be some things that we'll certainly work with Jimmy on, possibly DPW, regarding some matters that can be addressed within the current fiscal year or as part of a future budgeted request year. But then I think, so we're gonna have everything from small, medium to large is what I'm expecting from that report. So some of the medium and larger items, we'll certainly have to plan and submit requests for funding for certain ones. But the ones that we're able to handle within our operating budget and capacity, we will look to do so.
Okay. And I see Maya has her hand up, so I'm going to turn to her and let her ask her question.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add one thing to the list that we have here that's not on there for the schools. As we mentioned at school committee last week, we recently had a roof assessment done, and I believe we have the results. And Thurston and Sheehan, I'm actually going to turn this over to Lemma because she has the specific results of this, but I wanted to get this on the radar of this team because it is this, speaking of time sensitive, these things are time sensitive. And again, depending on order, could be impacted by timing, especially with respect to Sheehan. But Lemma, would you mind giving just a little bit more color on the results of that assessment?
Sure. Yes, so we had an assessment of a moisture study of our roofs. And one of the outcomes of that is just information about moisture penetration at the Sheehan roof. First of all, the scope of that covers a significant portion of the roof. The study didn't assess the shingled section of roof, and that also does need replacement. But they're giving us preliminary estimates on what the at least flat sections might cost, and that would be in excess of $1 million for Sheehan. We have also moisture penetration at Thurston, and at Thurston, it wouldn't be a whole scale replacement of the entire roof. There are sections that are aging. The roof is at different ages at Thurston, but there is moisture penetration in particular over the older gym. So that the gym at Thurston, that older roof there has had some moisture penetration, and we would need to replace some sections. And again, at the most recent estimates, these are not bids yet, but are somewhere around 900,000, so almost $1 million as well for Thurston. So we have a near-term decision on both of these. Neither one of them is available. There is no option to restore either one of those roof sections. So we do have to make a plan in FY24 about which one we would tackle first. And we do have funds in our capital accounts. So we have nearly $1 million that we've set aside in school capital over the years in order to address roof replacement that might arise. The question is going to be which one to tackle first, and how the long-term financial planning conversations that we have as a town inform that decision and help us determine which project to take on. And we will want engineers to start helping us write the specs for the roof replacement as soon as possible, even this summer, if I could. I do want to wait for the right conversations. So the school committee is going to have a capital subcommittee that looks at this question. And I know we as a team will need to meet here and think about it as well.
And Lemma, we've confirmed that none of these portions of the roof are still under warranty, right?
Yes, no, these are not sections that are under warranty. These are sections that are quite much older and have reached the end of useful life. They're over 20 years old.
Okay, so it looks like a total of about 2 million plus to do both roofs.
Right.
Yes. Meanwhile, there are other roof requirements like restorations and repairs that we will need to make, in particular at the high school. So the high school is an opportunity to restore and to prolong the life of the roof. So we're not looking at replacement there. And I think that's from the sense of preventive maintenance and continuing to preserve our assets, that would be a really wise move for us. But we couldn't fund the high school and Thurston and Sheehan. So we really have some decisions to make about how to use the current pot that the schools have at their disposal.
Okay. And I imagine you guys are also talking about, available facility resources as you think about, whether or not to invest $1 million in Sheehan if we're going to go forward. So there's probably several conversations that need to be had with respect
right.
to
And that conversation about when or whether to invest in Sheehan, I think is really appropriate for this group.
Okay. Yeah. So I think one of the things that we want to be able to do for this group on, one of our upcoming meetings is have a detailed sort of status of each facility that we're talking about and why and what is needed. Obviously, we've got, Sheehan that needs replacement. We have a roof at Sheehan that needs replacement. You certainly wouldn't want to invest $1 million to end up having to then just have that torn down. But you also have some available capacity other places. We also have the fire station where literally the walls are separating and being held up by lally columns underneath and have been so for 10 years. So there's a lot of those types of things where I want this group to be really, really well informed as to what the current status is, what the urgency is, and how we go about, appropriately planning and slotting that in to the debt calendar that Stephanie was just talking about, and obviously those things are going to require, approval of town meetings, many of them. So, Chris, I think, if you would, the other thing that we had, there was an interest in from the select board was for this group to talk about the CPA, the Community Preservation Act. And I would love for you just to give a little bit of background on that and how that is being thought of. And if we could then get into some of the, working group conversation, I think that'd be really helpful.
Sure. So just by background, the town has discussed CPA at town meeting as far back as 2001, when as my understanding wasn't here, but reading some of the documents, it was supported at town meeting, but it was not successful at the ballot. And there were, I think, another opportunity where it was brought before, it was not supported through that process. And then there was the Long Range Financial Planning Committee back in 2019 recommended not to bring it forward in 2019, 2020 timeframe because of some other factors. I think there was a school debt. There was also some concern regarding, I think the city of Boston was considering going for CPA and whether or not there was going to be funding there to make it available. Back in 2001, as I understand it, the town proposed a 3% surcharge. So just to make sure everyone's aware, the CPA, it's called the CPA surcharge, which can be from 0.5 to up to 3%, and it's a surcharge on real estate taxes.
Chris, before we go in too deep into that, can we just give everybody, is everybody aware of what the Community Preservation Act is and what it's intended to be able to fund? So it's a state fund that was created to be able to help with open space, recreation, affordable housing, and I believe there was a fourth bucket, Chris, that I'm missing?
The fourth bucket is really
Historic.
just administrative, but it's
Historic, right? Okay. So, and you need to, if my memory serves, if you vote this, we have to have a surcharge on property tax, correct? And what that means is that money is dedicated and goes into our community preservation fund, right? And we contribute, and you can, I believe it's 10% needs to go into each of the 4 buckets or 3 buckets, and then the remaining 70% can be allocated to any one of those. So just so people are aware of, how that works. And Chris, I would want you to just go into a little bit more detail, if you would, in terms of the timing of how that fund accumulates and accrues.
Yes. So just to go back to, so again, the range is, the surcharge is up to 3%. The town looked at, voted in 2001 for 3%. That was not supported at the ballot. Most communities now are looking at anywhere from 1 to 1.5%. The reason why I believe the select board is asking this committee to look at this now, looking back, and maybe those who are more familiar with this, I wasn't able to find an anchor project that was tied to the recommendation to the community. So an anchor project could be Hale for this go around. I did have a meeting with the representative from the CPA Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization that advocates for funding from the Commonwealth for CPA. They're very knowledgeable about the CPA process. They've helped many communities in a variety of areas, from discussion to implementation. We do have a representative that can certainly speak for present something to this committee, about a 15 to 20-minute presentation, just to give a little baseline education for everyone, to make sure everyone's on the same page at one of your future meetings, if you so choose. But the timing of this would require a vote at town meeting, and then passage at an election, which would have to take place after town meeting. So the way Westwood is set up, our annual election is before our annual town meeting. So we would have to go at a town meeting and then to follow up at an election for support into this.
Is there a
The timing-
time, Chris,
sorry?
is there a time within which the election needs to take place, or is that flexible?
It's flexible, but interesting point, Nancy. The coalition finds that when a ballot question is put on a presidential ballot is when you typically get the most success. So we are, as according to them, the discussion that we're having is the right window. So for example, if the committee was making a recommendation to the board and it was to go forward at your Springtown meeting, you would then have the vote at the Springtown meeting. If successful, then you could put it on the November ballot. You could do it an
Chris, how
earlier
would that-
ballot, but again, that was just a suggestion that they had. Then what would
Chris-
happen is after the
Sorry.
time.
Chris, there's a question.
Oh, yes.
I just want to ask, just while we're on talking about timing, how does that work with respect to us trying to preserve Hale? Will that give us sufficient time?
So that's a great point, and Melissa, I'll get right to that. And
Okay, great.
so it works. So to Melissa's question, the timing that we would have to follow right now, unless we had an earlier town meeting, something earlier than the spring, and this was ready to be recommended, the way it works is you have the town meeting, then you have the election. The following fiscal year, the committee's formed. That's when you can actually have the surcharge placed on the taxes. Any funds that are any authorizations spent from CPA has to go through the committee. The committee then makes its recommendation to town meeting. So in order for this to happen, I was not aware of this until Friday. The timing would have to be, we would pass it, we would form the committee. The committee would then make a recommendation to the future town meeting or the next town meeting. And if Hale was on that, Melissa, if Hale was on that recommendation, it could be funded. If Hale is funded prior to the formulation of the CPA, anything that's voted prior to the formulation of CPA, you cannot go back and what they call a pullback. You can't pull that back into the CPA, so it has to be part of the CPA. So if you have any eligible funding or projects that are funded through the town's normal budget process, you could not bring that into a subsequent CPA. That would have to be part of the CPA's committee recommendation to town meeting in order to be funded out of CPA. So the timing for Hale, what we were originally told, and after this conversation, it would be after the formation of the committee. So if there was movement to try to get Hale, something happening this fiscal year for Hale, this would not work with the CPA.
So Chris, if I may, Melissa, good question. And this is exactly why this group exists, is to be able to explore any and all creative options for financing all of these different projects and where funding sources may be able to come from. And I think this is a great segue into why we want to be able to create some working groups, because I don't want to just have this conversation and not have some visual aids and some things that are presented by a working group to help the community understand, right? We're sitting here having this conversation, and Chris has, got more in-depth knowledge than most of the rest of the folks on the phone or on the Zoom. So I would like to be able to create some working groups to study things further and have that be, part of the conversation as we review the various projects, because to Chris's point, there is significant sequencing that has to happen in terms of various town meetings, votes, et cetera, that need to take place in order to take advantage of these various things. So, Chris, I think, that would be sort of the next thing I'd like to cover on the agenda is the creation of a few working groups. You're on mute. Chris, you're on mute.
Thank you, Rob. If I could just add on to that. So a thought was regarding Hale being an anchor project, but a working group could certainly identify other anchor projects if that would make sense. So the funding for CPA we talk about recreation, we talk about open space, we talk about affordable housing. Those are buckets or categories that the town has funded through annual budget processes that CPA could be used, and those funds that have funded similar things in the past going forward could be reallocated to CPA or go towards instead of the general operating budget. So there are some other benefits to CPA, but I'm also very much in tune with other things that we're talking about, large capital projects that would go above 2.5%. But I do think, Rob, that the working group having that more in-depth conversation could certainly benefit this committee and then make its recommendation to the select board and potentially town meeting.
Certainly. Julie, I see you have your hand up.
So two questions. Is the CPA committee then an entity that stays in place forever, or is it really, okay, so Nancy's saying yes. So we established this committee, and then for the funding, does it work like exempt debt, that the surcharge on property taxes is in place only until we pay off, in this case, Hale, or is that something that that the surcharge is permanent or fluctuates? How does the funding work?
So, Rob, I can answer that question.
Go ahead.
So any town that accepts CPA has to stay in CPA for at least 5 years.
Okay.
Okay, so it's at least 5 years. Now, after 5 years, a town can vote to remove itself from the CPA. And if there's no debt tied to the CPA, so you can use CPA funds that are created by the town's surcharge to fund future debt. So if we were going to, for example, if we were going to borrow for some type of open space, I won't put a label on it, but some type of open space, and we were using CPA as the funding source, we could then borrow for that. But if the town said we want to get rid of CPA, anything that you're using it for borrowing, you just have to bring the surcharge down to fund that only. And when that's paid off, then it's gone away. So for example, if we were at a 1% as an example, and the town after the 6 years said, we want to get rid of CPA, we don't want to use this, and we were using it to fund some debt for one of the eligible projects. And in order to debt for the remaining term of that loan, we had to bring it down to an example, let's say 0.43%. Or 0.43. We could then bring it down to 0.43 from the 1% and just continue to pay that debt. Once that debt is paid off, then the surcharge would go completely away. But that's that's the amount that the residents would have to pay.
Now, just to clarify on Julie's question too. So when we're talking about creating this working group to study whether or not the CPA is something this group wants to recommend, that group only goes, as long as we need to make the recommendation. But when you're talking about the actual committee itself, my question, Chris, is after 5 years, if the town were to say we want to pull out of CPA, does the committee need to continue until the debt is completed?
That is not my understanding, Rob, because the commitment would have already been approved by town meeting.
Yep.
So, and there would be no other requests that the committee would take under suggestions. So we would be basically closing that opportunity off once we reduce that surcharge down.
But
Okay.
isn't that, I'll say, oversimplifying how CPA works? Because as you raise funds through the tax surcharge and get some funds from the state's pool of funds, that's part of it. It's not only our raising money, but it's also getting money allocated from the state, whatever the fund is that funds CPA.
Yes, there's a percentage, Nancy, yes, and last year it was 38%.
So the mechanics are that you have money that you've either raised yourself, comes from the state, the committee looks at it, but you have that allocation to different projects. And then as Rob was mentioning, the 10% and then the 70, you start creating a fund. It's not just a one project fund.
No, not at all.
So you can't necessarily close down the committee unless you have expended all the funds you have, because their role is to make recommendations to town meeting on the expenditure of those funds. So I just don't want it to sound like it's a one-shot wonder. It's actually more complex than that. And just for,
Good
Nancy,
clarification.
you're correct. I'm sorry if I made it
Yeah.
sound.
well, I
simplified
just
it too
wanted to be
much,
sure.
but
And
you wouldn't get additional surcharge, let me just say it this way. If the town were to vote it, based on Julie's question, if the town were to say we want to get out, you wouldn't get any more of the surcharge other than to
Right.
pay that debt. If we had any debt on the books, you would still receive money from the Commonwealth for a portion. But once those, or the Commonwealth would stop funding, depending on how it would work, because that percentage would go down a little bit. But yes, you would have to expend those funds that you've had in the coffers on those projects. So I would think it would be, you'd have to expend those funds. Well, I don't want to put a timeline on, but
Right.
you'd have to expend those funds.
And something else, I just want a little background commentary on the 2001. If I'm not mistaken, when we did that, and I was actually part of the group that tried to get it passed, it was new. The CPA was a fairly new concept. So I don't know the year it started, but it wasn't much before 2001. And
Mhm.
one of the issues that I think kept it from being passed is it was recommended that the surcharge be applied to both residential and commercial properties. And at the time, as a community, we were trying to figure out how to boost the commercial properties in town. Think pre-University Station, pre-Westwood Station. And the issue that many people had is, would that be a turnoff to commercial redevelopment in Westwood with an added tax surcharge? We're very sensitive to being competitive with other communities to try to rally our commercial tax base. And it was something that I think held back the final vote in support of the CPA because it's a tax surcharge. It's added taxation.
To that end, then I guess one of my questions is, does it, and this would be something that I would ask the working group to come back with, information on, is does that need to be applied universally to the tax base, or can it be applied only to residential? So, I don't know that we need to have all of those answers here today, but that's exactly why we want to create the working group, to be able
Yep.
to.
Yeah,
advise.
and I think
I
it
actually
was
have
an
an answer
option.
to that question, Rob, if you'd like it.
Sure.
So because Westwood has a split tax rate, Westwood could exempt all commercial properties from that surcharge. They
Okay.
also being the CPA also has different exemptions. The three most common exemptions are for all residential properties exempting the first $100,000 of valuation. The second most common is to exempt the first 100,000 for all commercial properties. And then they have a low income senior exemption as well. And that exemption is more of on an application basis, where the homeowner would have to submit an application in order for that to be considered. But those are the three most common exemptions. And if there's going to be a working group, the working group can look at the other exemptions as well.
Certainly. May I see you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. Do we have, and I realize it depends on the percentage that Westwood would choose, but what is the scope of magnitude if we did like a current snapshot? Like, let's say we just chose 1% right now. What would that look like for the fund? Do we know?
So basing that off of my conversation with the coalition, so not using our information, but the way they use this information that they access from the state, 1% with those exemptions is around $700,000. According to the coalition. Again, nothing that went through Stephanie. Just want to be clear.
And that 700 is what the 1% raise is not. Does that include the state fund contribution?
That does not include the state funding. That would just be the surcharge.
Now, the max of that 700,000 that you would be able to apply to any one of those three buckets, open space, recreation, and housing, would be 70%. Right, because you have to commit 10% to each of those other buckets.
Well, yeah, yes, so it's between 70 and 80% because you're already, if you're using, so let's say you have those three buckets and bucket one recreation, bucket two housing, bucket three open space, and you put 10% into recreation and open and affordable housing, but then you want to use a bulk of it for open space.
The
If you're
additional
using
70
at least
on top of the
10%,
other
you
10.
could use 70 to 80% of that.
Okay, yep, very good. Okay, so that is certainly one working group that we would like to be able to put together. And so I would just like to see if there are folks who are interested in being part of that working group. And Chris, keep me honest here with what that number can be in terms of the sort of voting members. What is the max size that can be, so that we can really size
Pat, is
that.
that, just to confirm with Pat, would that be 5 if our voting members are 11?
I believe that's the case. I don't think you could go to 6.
So are there 5 members, voting members, and you can just raise your hand, I suppose, who would like to serve on a working group with respect to CPA?
Rob, what are the other committees? Just thinking about time commitments. It
Certainly.
might be helpful to know how many working groups and what
Yeah.
they are.
One of the other working groups that I'd like to have formed is what I'll call a facilities reimagination group, right? So we have a number of facilities in town, and as things like, say, the study for the fire station come online, well, the siting of that is something that could be, lead to other potential changes. So the question becomes, how might we reimagine the use and utilization of existing facilities to accomplish as many of the goals for the projects that we have on our list? And that, to me, is one that will be a creative group that says, we might look at an existing facility that's being used currently as this, and if we transition that to another use, that would allow us to accomplish something that's on that list and potentially consolidate if we make another building. So I think there are things like that that would be worth this group exploring, because we've got a longer list of projects than we have the ability to fund. And I think that that's the type of creativity this group should be engaged in. So that would be another one. And then, Chris, was there a third that we had discussed?
I'm sorry, Rob, I think that those were the two that we were really talking about, was the facilities, and then we're looking at the CPA.
Right.
And I'm sorry, the third we did talk about was policies, but the board recently updated that back in October of 22. When we were talking about this before that update.
Right.
So that was the third one.
Okay. So, Maya, those are the two that I think are, in need of some additional conversation and some volunteers to help facilitate those conversations, come back with, information for the broader group.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
So right now we're talking about the CPA group. I see Skip Wells has his hand up to volunteer, as does Nancy.
Yes.
Melissa, did you want to maybe get involved with that group, given your question with respect to him?
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm 2 hours behind you guys in Colorado, so it's a little dark in my room, but
Sorry.
I said yes.
Excellent. So we have 3. I'm going to intentionally stay away from that one, given its sort of proximity to Hale and my
Limitations.
people there. Yep.
Rob, was it Nancy James and Nancy Hyde? I saw Nancy James shaking her head. Were you agreeing to be in it, Nancy James?
I was, although I
Yeah.
am interested in facilities, so I don't know if we have a limit. So we might need to choose.
I didn't see Nancy nodding her head, so I missed that. If you guys,
Oh.
anybody who wants to, if you could just use the hand raise function, just so that it makes it easier for us to identify it visually, that would be great. So I see, all right, we have Melissa, we have Nancy Hyde, we have Skip Wells. Nancy James, I think if you're interested in the facilities one, I'm gonna ask that I hold you off to that group. If you would.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any others wishing to be involved in the CPA discussion? All
Julie,
right.
Julie, don't you want to be on it?
I can do it. I'll
I
join
think you'd
that
be
group,
great
too.
with your, the finance commission background that you have.
Sure, I'm
Okay.
happy to help.
And is there anyone, Chris, that you want to potentially have involved from an ex officio standpoint in helping that group navigate?
Yeah, so I would, well, without putting anyone on the spot, can I just talk to the team first and we'll get back to you?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Unless
right,
someone would like to volunteer, feel free.
So I saw there are 4, Julie, Skip, Nancy Hyde, and Melissa that are going to work on the working group for CPA,
And Julie Brett.
and Julie Bride. I said her first.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay, 5.
So no, there's 4 of you. So then with respect to the facilities reimagination. working
Rob,
group-
sorry to interrupt, but Skip Wells has his hand up.
Oh, is that a question, Skip? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak.
No,
Okay, so that was just a volunteer to the committee there, or not the committee, the working group. Okay, so with respect to the facilities reimagination group, I see Lemma has her hand up. Do you have a question, Lemma?
Question, yes.
Yes.
One thing I was wondering, and you may have a vision for the working groups as a first phase of them, and then maybe we would consider future like work that needs to be done. But one thing I imagined might be useful here is like determining some kind of decision criteria as we prioritize projects or make difficult decisions. And we may need to do some work to norm and decide what our decision criteria are and how we make our determinations.
There, we will have a rubric, if you will, to help with that. Yes. All right, so are there folks who would want to participate in the working group with respect to facilities reimagination? I see Nancy, I see Maya. I am going to put myself into that mix as well. I see Chris Paff, that's great. And Lemma. You keeping your hand up because you want to be part of that group, right? Yes, just want to make sure. Okay, excellent. Anyone else? And I know that Nancy James, we had talked about you as well, so we've got your hand up, great. And I see Todd, excellent. Excellent, okay. So that is a very strong group with a broad cross-section of visibility into and understanding of the various facilities. So I think that's helpful. Okay. Thank you. That naturally segues into the last part of our discussion, which is meeting frequency and both for working groups and for the broader group. Originally, we had talked about this being, meeting quarterly. I think that there are, based on some of the things that have been said here today with respect to some of the projects, maybe a more urgent need to meet on a more frequent basis, whether that's for the broader group on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, And then the working groups, I think, would probably need to meet more frequently in order to have recommendations at upcoming meetings. So, Chris, did you and Tish have anything with respect to future dates that we wanted to propose? Let's start with, could people make this if this were a monthly meeting? I know we asked you for, quarterly, so that is a significant increase in load, but I would like to begin with the monthly and work back from there if that doesn't work. So let's start with monthly. And just to keep it organized by show of hands using the raised hand function, who can make monthly? All
I'm
right.
assuming, Rob, that it can be done by Zoom, correct?
Correct. Yes, the remote meeting provisions continue through 2025. All right. So I see that monthly really only is a problem for Skip, Paul, and Molly. Molly said yes, so it's really, or no, sorry, Paul said yes, so it's really Skip and Molly. All right, so that I think leads us to, we have a good quorum for a monthly basis. And so what I would say there is, let's try, let me just see, I see hands going up, coming down.
Rob, monthly is fine with me.
Okay, great, Skip, thank you. All right, so with that, Chris, I'm gonna leave it to you and Tish to try and, with many of the other public meetings that you guys have to manage through with the team, to make some suggestions as to, I'd love to be able to say it's a regular on, say, the second Tuesday of the month in the morning or something along those lines. Does morning work for folks like this if we keep these meetings to essentially an hour to 75 minutes?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Can the working groups have flexibility, though?
Yes, I
Because we
actually
would
would
also
leave that to
schedule
the working
those.
groups to schedule themselves if they can.
So if our next meeting is going to be in July, presumably the working group should meet before that meeting.
Correct. Correct.
So Rob and committee, following this discussion, the next meeting would be Tuesday, July 11th.
Mhm.
Does that work for everyone at 8 o'clock?
Works for me.
Yes. I think
I will
it's going to be a little challenging to get in a working group meeting before then with the holiday schedule. So we probably need to do it in June. I'm just,
For the two working
Logistics.
groups. Yeah.
And for our CPA work group, Chris Coleman, will we have you as part of those meetings?
yes.
Okay, great.
All right. Why don't we do you want to try and choose a date for the CPA working group while you have all of you on the phone? I think that'd be really helpful to try and just get something on a calendar now.
Yep.
So my thought on it is there's a lot of information out there that we should all be reading before the group comes together. So I would encourage us to think the end of June. Maybe
So
that
like the
week of
week-
the 26th,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would prefer not on a Monday, but that week would work for me.
not on a Monday. Any preference on daytime versus evening?
I like the early morning. I don't know about other folks.
That works for me.
And Skip, what do you think?
That's fine with me.
And Chris?
I can make it work, sure.
So do we want to do the Tuesday morning, given that we're doing these things on Tuesday?
Sure.
Sure,
Okay. How about 8 a.m. on Tuesday, June 27th?
perfect.
that one Tuesday is not good with me. I have a board meeting.
Oh, and what time? So 8 a.m.'s not gonna work?
Correct. I could do late in the afternoon, but the board meeting is from 8 to 2.
How about on the Wednesday at 8 a.m.?
I can do that.
Melissa
Yeah. That works for me also.
and Chip,
Yep, 28's good.
Chris?
I can make that work too.
We have a date and a time.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, then why don't we see if the facilities group can take that Tuesday slot on the 27th at 8 a.m. Would that work for the group that has volunteered to be part of that facilities group?
Is it possible to move it to 8:30? Only because I'm usually commuting at 8.
I could make that work.
And that works for me as well.
It won't work for me. I'm actually down in Georgia for a baseball tournament, but Jimmy, maybe you can just slip in for me just for that week, if you wouldn't mind jumping in.
Absolutely. Yep,
Okay.
not a problem.
Thank you.
That'd be great. Thanks, Jimmy. All right. Well, then let's book that. So 8:30 on the 27th, the facilities working group. And we have July 11th as the next meeting for this group at 8 in the morning. All right.
Nancy, you mentioned materials. Is there information that could be sent out, or should we just try to see what we can find?
I think we should send it out.
Great.
I'll talk to Chris about information he has. The good news with Chris, I'm gonna say this about you, Chris, there are a lot of good things about you, but you were in Needham before we hired you, and Needham had the CPA, so I imagine you have a good idea on materials, but I just did a little looking up. And for anyone who isn't, you know, previously familiar, there's good background information, but I'd also suggest that maybe after the first meeting, we do get that group in, or representative, to make a presentation to the subcommittee. And if we think it's worthy enough to bring it to the entire group, maybe we can impose on that same person for a second presentation. But I do think getting the facts all down is really important to understanding how to make a recommendation going forward.
I agree.
So that
Yeah.
premise, so I think you should, I'd be happy to talk to Chris about what information should get disseminated, probably be more than you need. But there are news articles for different communities. There's the coalition that has its own information, and there's recent news out of Boston on issues they're having with the CPA. So it relates to a lot of communities are diverting money to open space, and open space is being used as a wedge to block housing. Yet the state is pro creation of affordable housing. So there are a lot of current articles on that. Anyway.
Yeah, I was just in the Globe just the other day. Yeah, and I think that, it would be very, very beneficial for all of the members of the working group to be working off of the same information. So, okay.
Is there also background on Hale and what that project would entail, or is that not scoped fully? I know they're two different efforts, but if the anchor project would be Hale, it would be helpful to have some background on what that would entail.
Chris, I'm going to let you answer that.
I can certainly answer it during the subcommittee meeting because we don't have
Okay.
any background. We know what the ask is. but we
Okay,
can certainly talk about the ask and how that would work with CPA if we were able to time it the right way.
okay, thanks, Chris.
We'll have that conversation.
Okay. So I think that brings us to the end of our meeting. I don't,
Excuse me, Rob, just as a reminder, and we'll put this on the select board agenda, but just for everyone's to be aware, there will be a recommendation to the select board to appoint 3 ex officio members. One is a replacement. Since Emily will be leaving us at the end of the month, we will recommend to have Tim. And others can say his last name. I'm just going to say Tim.
Pivovar.
Every time I read it, something different.
Pivovar.
To have Tim appointed as an ex officio member. Also looking to have Elijah, our town planner, appointed as an ex officio member, and I believe that's
Morning.
2 I have, so. Okay. Yeah, so we'll do that. So if you see it on the select board agenda, I don't want anyone to be surprised, but that's what we're looking to do.
Will there be other members appointed too, since we've had a couple official members drop off?
Yes, the actual voting members, Nancy, yes, that
Hmm.
the select board will be making their recommendations on those voting members.
When you do that, given the CPA working group has 4 members, you might want to consider who you'd invite to go on the CPA group. If one of the new members is interested.
Okay, I see there's one question from community resident, and I will read it because it's we're sort of in that public and press section before we close the meeting. Fran Fusco of 20 Pine Lane is asking, could we be more specific when the Westwood Fire Department feasibility will be presented to the select board? And then it says meetings should be recorded on WMC if meetings are held at 8 in the morning. Also, by having meetings at 8, you're limiting residents' ability to participate in these important talks. We are, I'll let Chris answer the feasibility study in terms of timing. As far as I know, we still don't have it in hand. Chris, you want to elaborate on that at all?
Sure. As far as the feasibility study is based off the operational study. So we have a delay in the operational study. So our hope is that we're going to have that at your upcoming select board meeting, Rob. But if not, it would be the following one. And then after we have the operational study, then we'll be able to get the feasibility study shared with the board.
Yep.
So
And then
the
with
earliest would be the meeting in July, excuse me, for feasibility.
Sure. And then with respect to, the meetings being recorded, not all meetings are recorded on Westwood Media Center because there are, limitations to staff and scope of the contract with Westwood Media Center. So that's why we hold these on Zoom, and you can see that it is being recorded. So there is, transparency to all of these meetings. So that's how I would answer that question.
So we
And
record it and post it? Is that what happens?
So Rob, I did have a conversation with Melinda yesterday, specifically regarding this group and the recording. So what will happen is once this is recorded, we will send a link and she will add it to the library of recorded meetings. So it's a one-stop shop for anyone who's interested.
Great. Thank you. All right. With that, we are at the end of our agenda. We have talked about our next meeting on the 11th of July at 8 a.m. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. I guess since we're remote.
Roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I know. Okay, and that means I've got to go back and actually have the voting members. So let me pull up that portion of the.
Look at the
Rob,
screen.
while
You
you're
can,
pulling that up, I just want to point out that we do have an additional member, ex officio member, Teddy, who's down in the Molly Keene screen. So he is a local government expert, so he will be vital I think he will be a great asset to this committee.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to.
I can read it if you don't have it. I have the list.
That would be helpful, Tish. I really appreciate it.
So, Rob Gotti,
Aye.
Maya Plotkin,
Yes.
Paul Tusseri,
might be dropped off.
oh, you're on mute. Oh,
Just need a yes from you. Paul.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Kyle.
having problems. Yes.
Yes. Julie Bride,
Yes.
Skip Wells,
Yes.
Nancy Hyde,
Aye.
Chris Paff,
Yes.
Nancy James,
Yes.
Melissa McDonough,
Yes.
Chris Coleman.
I'm not a voting member.
Oh, correct. Okay. Well, this is just to close the meeting, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
There we go.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you at your respective working group meetings and all together again on the 11th. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.